My fiancée insisted on wearing her ex's locket, saying, "It's a part of my history." I said, "History is important." So I made her part of mine. Her jaw dropped when I took back the engagement ring to put it in a family vault. I, 31M, thought I knew everything about my fiancée when I proposed 6 months ago. We'd been together for 3 years, living together for the last year and a half. She was beautiful, ambitious, and seemed perfect for me. But there was one thing that always bothered me: a small silver locket she wore every single day. The locket wasn't particularly expensive or elegant. It was simple, slightly tarnished, and hung from a thin chain around her neck. Every time I asked about it, she'd give me vague answers about it being sentimental. I never pushed too hard because everyone has their private memories, right? Everything changed last Tuesday night during dinner at my parents' house. My mother was showing off the family jewelry collection to my fiancé, explaining the history behind each piece. There were rings passed down through 5 generations, necklaces that survived 2 world wars, and brooches that my great-grandmother wore to her wedding. My fiancé seemed genuinely interested, asking questions about the stories behind each piece. Then my mother mentioned that once we were married, my fiancé would become the keeper of these family heirlooms, responsible for passing them down to the next generation. That's when my mother noticed the locket. She complimented it, saying it looked vintage and asking about its history. My fiancé's face went pale for a moment before she smiled and said it was from her ex-boyfriend, her first love from college. She explained that he'd given it to her during their 2-year relationship, and even though they'd broken up 5 years ago, she still wore it because it represented an important part of her personal history. The room went dead silent. My father cleared his throat uncomfortably while my mother tried to change the subject. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, but I didn't say anything right then. I waited until we got home. Once we were alone, I asked her if she really thought it was appropriate to wear jewelry from an ex-boyfriend while being engaged to me. She got defensive immediately, saying I was being possessive and that the locket didn't mean anything romantic anymore. She insisted it was just a piece of her past that she wasn't ready to let go of. I tried to explain how it made me feel, seeing her wear a gift from another man every single day. I told her it felt disrespectful to our relationship and to our future marriage. She accused me of being insecure and controlling, saying that if I truly loved her, I wouldn't care about something so trivial. The argument escalated quickly. She said the locket was a part of her history, and she wasn't going to erase her past just to make me comfortable. She claimed that asking her to remove it was like asking her to pretend she never existed before meeting me. I went to bed angry that night, but by morning, I'd had time to think. She was right about one thing. History is important. Very important. I spent the next week doing some research. I hired a private investigator to look into her past relationship with this ex-boyfriend. What I discovered changed everything. They hadn't just dated in college. They'd been together for 3 years, not 2 like she told me. They'd lived together for most of that time. More importantly, they'd only broken up 3 years ago, not 5. That meant she'd been wearing his locket for the entire duration of our relationship, even when we first started dating. But the real kicker came when I found out they'd been engaged. She'd never mentioned being engaged before. According to the investigator, the engagement had lasted 8 months before she called it off. The locket wasn't just a boyfriend's gift, it was from her ex-fiancé. I also discovered that they'd stayed in contact after the breakup. Not just casual social media interactions, but actual phone calls and text messages. The investigator couldn't get the content of their communications, but the frequency was concerning. They'd spoken at least once a month for the past 2 years. Armed with this information, I realized my fiancé had been lying to me about fundamental aspects of her past. The locket wasn't just a sentimental keepsake. It was a symbol of a relationship she'd never fully let go of. That's when I decided that if history was so important to her, I'd make sure she became part of mine in the most appropriate way possible. I started making my own plans. First, I went to my family's attorney and had him draw up some documents. Then I visited my parents and had a long conversation with them about family traditions and the importance of protecting our legacy. The following Saturday, I suggested we have dinner at the same restaurant where I proposed to her 6 months earlier. She was excited, thinking it was a romantic gesture. She wore her best dress and, of course, the locket. During dinner, I brought up the topic of our upcoming wedding and how excited I was to officially make her part of my family. I told her how much it meant to me that she'd be taking my last name and becoming the newest member of our family tree. She smiled and said she was looking forward to it too. That's when I told her I'd been thinking about what she'd said about history being important, and I completely agreed with her. I explained that my family had a long tradition of preserving important moments and artifacts from significant relationships. I mentioned that we had a family vault where we kept documents, photographs, and mementos from important events in our family's history. She nodded along, probably wondering where I was going with this. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. For a moment, her eyes lit up, probably thinking I had some kind of additional gift or surprise ring for her. Instead, I opened the box to reveal that it was empty. I told her that since history was so important to her, and since she valued keeping mementos from significant relationships, I decided to help her preserve our relationship properly. I explained that I'd spoken with my family attorney and had documentation drawn up to officially record our engagement as part of my family's historical records. Then I asked her to give me back the engagement ring. Her face went white. She asked me what I was talking about, why I wanted the ring back. I calmly explained that since she believed in preserving artifacts from important relationships, I wanted to make sure our engagement ring was properly preserved too. I told her that the ring would be placed in our family vault, along with documentation of our engagement, photographs from our time together, and a detailed record of our relationship. This way, future generations of my family would know about our engagement and understand its significance in our family's history. She started to panic, asking if I was breaking up with her. I assured her that I wasn't. I was simply ensuring that our relationship was properly documented and preserved, just like she was doing with her locket. I explained that since she valued her ex-fiancé's gift enough to wear it every day of our relationship, I wanted to make sure future generations understood that our engagement was also an important part of history. The ring would be safely stored alongside other significant family artifacts, where it would be protected and preserved for posterity. She realized what I was doing. She asked me if this was about the locket, and I told her it was about honesty and respect. I laid out everything I'd discovered, the real timeline of her previous relationship, the fact that they'd been engaged, and that she'd been in contact with him throughout our relationship. Her face went through a range of emotions: shock, anger, fear, and finally something that looked like acceptance. She tried to explain herself, saying she'd lied because she didn't want me to feel threatened by her past. She insisted that her relationship with her ex was completely over and that the locket was just a habit. I told her that if that were true, she would have been honest with me from the beginning. The fact that she'd lied about something so fundamental showed me that she wasn't ready for marriage, at least not marriage to me. I stood up from the table and extended my hand, waiting for her to return the ring. She sat there for a long moment, staring at me with tears in her eyes. Finally, with shaking hands, she slipped the engagement ring off her finger and placed it in my palm. I thanked her for understanding the importance of preserving history properly. I told her that our engagement would indeed be documented in my family's records, along with the circumstances that led to its end. This way, future generations would have a complete picture of this chapter in our family's story. As I walked away from the table, I could hear her crying behind me. I felt a moment of sadness, but mostly I felt relief. I'd learned something important about the kind of woman I wanted to marry, and it wasn't someone who would lie about fundamental aspects of her past while clinging to symbols of previous relationships. Update 1. The following Monday, my now ex-fiancée showed up at my apartment. She wasn't wearing the locket. She said she'd thought about everything over the weekend and realized she'd made a mistake. She wanted to talk about working things out. I invited her in and listened to what she had to say. She apologized for lying about her past and admitted that she'd kept the locket because she wasn't completely over her ex-fiancé. She said that seeing me take back the ring made her realize what she was losing and that she was ready to let go of her past completely. She'd brought the locket with her and offered to throw it away if I'd take her back. She said she understood now why her behavior had been inappropriate and that she was willing to be completely transparent about everything. I appreciated her honesty, but I told her it was too late. The issue wasn't just the locket, it was the lying. She'd had 3 years to be honest with me about her past, and she'd chosen deception instead. Even worse, she'd only decided to come clean after getting caught. I explained that trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to rebuild. I couldn't marry someone knowing that she'd hidden such important information from me. What else might she be hiding? What other lies might surface after we were married? She begged me to reconsider, saying she'd do anything to fix things. She offered to go to counseling, to cut all contact with her ex, to do whatever it took to prove she was committed to our relationship. I told her that if she'd made these offers 6 months ago, or even 6 weeks ago, things might have been different. But she'd only decided to change after facing consequences for her actions. That wasn't real change, that was damage control. She left my apartment in tears, still carrying the locket she'd offered to throw away. Update 2. 2 weeks later, I got a call from my friend who worked at the same company as my ex-fiancée. He told me she'd been telling people at work that I'd broken up with her over a piece of jewelry and that I was controlling and possessive. This version of events bothered me because it completely ignored the lying and deception. She was painting herself as the victim of an unreasonable man who couldn't handle her having a past. I decided to set the record straight with the people who mattered to me. I didn't go around broadcasting the details, but when mutual friends asked what happened, I told them the truth. I explained that the issue wasn't the jewelry itself, but the dishonesty about her past relationship and her continued contact with her ex-fiancé. Most of our friends understood once they heard the full story. A few said they thought I'd been too harsh, but most agreed that the lying was a serious problem. Several people mentioned that they'd always thought it was weird that she wore another man's jewelry while being engaged to me. My parents were completely supportive of my decision. My mother said she'd had a bad feeling about the locket from the moment she saw it, and my father said he was proud of me for standing up for myself and our family's values. The ring is now officially part of our family's historical collection. My mother had it appraised and documented, along with a written account of the engagement and its end. She said it would serve as a reminder to future generations about the importance of honesty in relationships. Update 3. About a month after our breakup, I found out through mutual friends that my ex-fiancée had reconnected with her former fiancé. They'd apparently been talking more frequently since our relationship ended, and she'd started wearing the locket again. This confirmed what I'd suspected all along. She'd never really moved on from that relationship. The locket wasn't just a piece of history. It was a connection she'd maintained to someone she wasn't ready to let go of. I felt vindicated in my decision. If I'd married her, I would have been competing with a ghost for the rest of my life. She would have always been comparing me to him, wondering what might have been if they'd stayed together. A few friends suggested that maybe I should feel bad about the way things turned out, but I don't. I gave her multiple opportunities to be honest with me, and she chose deception every time. The dramatic way I handled the breakup was simply a reflection of how seriously I take the concept of honesty in a relationship. I'm not bitter about what happened. If anything, I'm grateful that I discovered her true character before we got married. Divorce would have been much more complicated and expensive than a broken engagement. I've started dating again, and I'm much more careful about asking the right questions early in relationships. I've learned that it's not enough to assume someone shares your values. You need to verify that they actually live by them. The experience taught me that sometimes the most important conversations in a relationship are the difficult ones. If someone can't handle those conversations with honesty and maturity, they're not ready for marriage. As for the ring, it remains in my family's vault, serving its purpose as a historical artifact. It's a reminder that not all love stories have happy endings, but sometimes the unhappy endings are the ones that save us from bigger mistakes. History is indeed important, just like she said. I'm glad I made sure both of our histories were properly preserved and documented. The only difference is that mine was preserved with honesty, while hers continues to be built on deception. I have no regrets about my decision. Trust is the foundation of any successful marriage, and without it, even the most beautiful engagement ring is just an expensive piece of metal sitting in a vault, waiting to tell its story to future generations who will hopefully learn from our mistakes.